Okay, so thank you for joining us today as we launch Spark. Spark is a place where researchers, community leaders, and entrepreneurs come together to engage with the complex social realities of today. Together, we learn and build the research skills and technologies needed to build a brighter world. I'm excited to share this short session with you. If you'd like more information about our topic, please visit our website at spark.mcmaster.ca and please request a research conversation. Please don't hesitate to jump in and share your knowledge. We want this to be a conversation. So the session you've joined today will focus on asking and analyzing demographic questions for intersectionality. So the term intersectionality is attributed to Kimberly Crenshaw. She drew attention to the unique disadvantages faced by African American women. Crenshaw built on the critique of the second wave feminist movement, which focused primarily on the concerns of white middle-class women and overlooked the unique experiences of racialized women. Oftentimes, we all hold multiple social identities simultaneously, such as race, gender, sexuality, immigrant status. So intersectionality examines how multiple oppressed identities interact to create overlapping and compounding systems of disadvantage. So when we talk about studying intersectionality, the overwhelming majority of research on intersectionality is qualitative in nature. Originally, this theory was popular in gender studies and social sciences. It's now gaining a lot of popularity in health research, psychology, education fields. So this session will just focus on the intersections of race and gender, but intersectional identities go way beyond that to measure class, immigrant status, sexual orientation, disability status, etc. So before we discuss how to study intersectionality in quantitative research, I just want to cover the topic of how to ask demographic questions in surveys. So one of the things that I do as a researcher at the Diversity Institute and also here at Spark is creating surveys and designing surveys. And a lot of the times I like to use questions from Statistics Canada. They are useful because they're useful for comparison's sake, so you can always refer back to the national population statistics. They're also good in the sense that most times, maybe not in this case, as you'll see, but most times they're designed really well because they have the budget and availability to test measures and do all those things. So up until the most recent census, Statistics Canada measured sex instead of gender. And it was asked by asking respondents, what is this person's sex? Is it male? Is it female? Can anyone tell me what the issues of asking, I guess, measuring gender, or in this case, sex this way?
It doesn't apply to a lot of folks. There's more identities than just those two.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Exactly. So for years, I think academics have complained to Statistics Canada, and people have complained saying that this is not an inclusive way to measure your gender or sex. So in 2019, Statistics Canada did a test where they actually now use two questions to measure, one to measure sex, one to measure gender. So they ask, what was this person's sex at birth? This is what they've done in the most recent census. And then they say, what is this person's gender? So, and then they say, refers to current gender, which may be different from sex assigned at birth and may be different from what is indicated on legal documents. So in this case, they have, for gender, they have three options. So you can specify your gender. So you write whatever it is that you identify as. So this two-question approach allows Statistics Canada to basically keep the sex questions so that their research can be compared from previous years. And it also enables them to measure the transgender population by comparing answers from both questions. So they would look at your sex at birth versus your gender that you identify as now. It also addresses the data gap on the transgender and non-binary population. And then they say it fulfills the need for gender inclusive questions. Does anyone see a problem with the way that this is asked? Is there anything that you? Well, I'll keep moving on. Okay, so the newest census uses the one that I just showed you. Gender is also can be measured in other ways. So in a survey that I've done personally, we asked, are you male? Yes, no. Are you female? Yes, no. On the right, you can see the results that we got in the survey. The total was population was 1,516. But in this case, the way we asked it, we were told by people who filled out the survey that it was overly complicated and not necessary. And they had suggested that we ask an open-ended question, which I'll get to next. But I just want to point to you. So when we ask, are you female, are you male, the two no's, like, so you have the no, I'm not a female, no, I'm not a male. And then yes, I'm a female, and yes, I'm a male. So that is the non-binary population, and that came up to about 21 people. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to do much with that question in itself. So does anyone see a problem with asking an open-ended question, asking gender as an open-ended question?
That's a lot of data you're going to have to sort through.
Exactly. So that's 1,516 responses that I would then have to go through and try to sort out. Sometimes we might not have the research capabilities of doing that kind of work. Other times it might make sense to do it that way. So over at the Diversity Institute, I use this particular measure. I'll tell you what is wrong with this measure, but so I use a check all that apply, and we say which of the following best describes your gender identity, and we list a whole bunch of gender identities. And then there is an option for an identity not listed, please specify. And then there's also prefer not to answer, because it's a sensitive question and people shouldn't be forced in your surveys to answer questions. So one of the problems with this question is, like I said, in the previous survey that I did with 1,516 responses, I had 21 people. So with 21 people as a whole group of non-binary, I couldn't really do much with that. So if we look at each of these categories, we'll probably have a handful in each category other than woman and man. So it becomes not very useful sometimes for analysis. And I will get to, I'll provide more details on what we can do for that in later slides. So when we're measuring gender identity, we need to consider a couple of things. So for example, why are we concerned about gender? Why are we asking gender questions? How important is it for your analysis? Also, we should ask ourselves, how will the information collected be used? So for example, what will we do with this information? Will we run crosstabs? So for example, in my other, in the example I showed you earlier with 21 people, there isn't really much that we could do other than perhaps maybe do cross tabulations, but even in that case with 21 people, it becomes quite small and you have very small cell sizes. So, so Yeah, so the things to note is you want to avoid using the word other as a response option. So when you ask about what is your gender, you don't want to say male, female, and other because it's very quote unquote othering to use that word. I always have a prefer not to answer option because, again, like I said, people shouldn't be forced to respond to a question. And then when you have questions like the previous one that I showed you, where you have check all that apply questions, it can be trickier because the analysis becomes trickier because now people are in more than one category. And so you have to make sure that you treat the analysis keeping that in mind. And if there's any questions about how to analyze check all that apply, you can get a hold of me. I can help with that. I'm just showing you in the right here, the sex at birth from the census test. Please do not take the 0.07% as non-binary as a reflection of the non-binary population in Canada, but just want to show you from the testing that they did that they did receive a non-binary population, and this is what it looked like. So they took all the handwritten responses and had a third category that they called non-binary. So oftentimes that is what happens when you don't have enough survey population, sample size in your survey to do a better analysis. I'm just gonna move on. And if you have any questions, just let me know, but I'm just gonna move on to analyzing ethnicity and race. So Statistics Canada measures ethnic origins by asking what were the ethnic or cultural origins of this person's ancestors, and then they define what an ancestor is and they give you examples. Just to show you how important the examples were, when the category or the example of Jewish was taken out in, I believe, 2016 census, it as an example, it resulted in a loss for the official count of Canada's Jewish population from 309,000 in 2011 to 143,000 in 2016. So as a result, the government will add a significant number of examples of ethnic origins to the 2021 census, which will once again include Jewish as a possible answer. But it just goes to show you how asking a question can really influence the type of responses that you get and the way that you ask a question. So what is the problem with asking ethnicity in this way? Can anyone tell me? I mean, we covered it with gender, where yes, you'll now have to go through about 2,000 or 1,000 responses or however many responses you have, but are there any other issues?
The examples are not enough. I mean, there can be even more ethnic origins of people.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can never list every possible example, that's for sure. I'll just give you an example. So when you ask, so this is from a survey that I've personally done, and these are the kinds of responses that you get, which then you have to, for analysis purpose, code, right? So you'll have people that say they are Canadian and British. You'll have people that say they're mixed. You'll have people that say that they're a human being, that they're Scandinavian, that they're multi-generational Canadian. So now you have to somehow come up with I guess, categories that make sense. And then you have to also have enough in a category to do a proper analysis, right? So we need sufficient number of people. So for example, in this case, we do have like enough probably British, because you'll see that, or so we'd have to make decisions in this case on how to analyze these responses. So that's another challenge. So Statistics Canada measures racialization using visible minority, their famous category that they use. There are a number of articles that show problems with this definitions. And so I won't cover that just for the sake of time. but I just want to show you, this is an inclusive example that we at the Diversity Institute use, and we kind of ask it in this way, but this is just another option of how you could ask it. There's definitely other ways. Most of the time you'll see that you might not have enough sample size to study each of these populations, but you do want to be more inclusive. So sometimes we have as much categories as we think makes sense, but oftentimes the analysis ends up becoming racialized versus non-racialized because of the lack of adequate sample sizes. So, what are the challenges of incorporating intersectionality into quantitative analysis? So in my personal example with the 1,516, I just did a cross tabulation between gender and racialization and you can see here that there's about 93 racialized women in the sample. So that seems adequate enough to do cross tabulations perhaps, but sometimes it is not enough to do interactions depending on how many variables are in your model. So the solution to this is, when possible, we should try to oversample these groups. So whenever you design a survey and you have the opportunity to choose your sample, then you might want to try to get more from a particular group that's underrepresented so that you will have adequate sample size for analysis. The other solution is to use large national surveys because they can oftentimes provide opportunities for examining intersectionality. So things like the General Social Survey, the Canadian Community Health Survey, the census, those kind of big, large surveys often have enough sample size for analysis. So I just want to show you why studying intersectionality and the way you study it in quantitative methods matter. So the left and the right are basically data from a study that explored how gender and race were influencing the referral of patients for cardiac catheterization. So the authors had data on both race and gender, and they did a main effects analysis where they looked at the influence of gender, and then they looked at the influence of race, and then they combined these main effects additively to create the graph on the left. So on the left, it kind of shows you that white men have a higher, in comparison to white men, you know, white women, black men, and black women have lower odds of getting referrals, right? When the analysis redone using a quantitative intersectionality-based model, these are the results that we find on the right. So it becomes clear quickly that, oops, sorry, yeah. So what becomes clear here is that that the real bias is against Black women, right? The initial incorrect results on the left that show that white women and Black men have lower odds ratios is due to the fact that in the additive mean effects model, both of these categories include some of the biases being shown to Black women. So that is why we recommend that you should study intersectionality using a interaction term rather than a additive model. So it's basically adding versus multiplication in this case. So in the first example, we hold gender constant while looking at the impact of race, but that doesn't tell us whether the impact of these individual characteristics differ when they're allowed to fluctuate. So for example, what is the effect of race when gender is allowed to be either male or either female, right? Whereas in the second outcome where it says outcome equals race times gender, that's a multiplication model. This model can answer the question of how does the outcome change for different combinations of the variable. So the multiplication in the model accurately estimates the simultaneous and layered effects of the different variables. So in this case, we recommend that interaction terms be used rather than a kind of unitary or additive model. So that was just a very quick and I guess, yeah, a very quick way on kind of studying studying intersectionality using interaction terms, but also asking demographic questions in surveys. So does anybody have any questions? We have about 3 or 4 minutes.
So sorry, I'll jump into the question then. So in terms of like using a kind of intersectional model or interaction effects, are there, I mean, I don't have a data set in mind that I'm thinking of, but kind of, is it the kind of thing we can come and ask you for advice on how to do it? Is there like information available on the internet about how would we incorporate this in our research?
So yeah, I mean, the internet has a vast majority of information nowadays, like everything. I mean, I can learn how to fix basically replace a toilet, for example, without hiring a plumber on the internet. So there is a lot of stuff on intersectionality and studying it. The field is still new, so there is not as much literature as in terms of examples, but there are a lot of research coming out of health and stuff. But yeah, you can always reach out to us over at Spark,